Contrary, the show that remains unafraid to give you the picks that are in the darkest recesses of our mind, the ones that we only share with our priests in confessional or alone into a mirror while sobbing over a bottle of whiskey. I'm Chris Spags, joined today by the number one DFS player in the world and joined by my very dark intros. Alex Baker, better known to you guys as Awesemo. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great. Always great to be talking some contrarian strategy here. Excited to do a video with Nolan. First time. Evan couldn't make it this week. Nolan's filling in. Some big shoes to fit into.
Yeah, I was just going to say, some big shoes to fill there.
Yeah, but I have the biggest confidence in you, as we were talking about pre-show. You can never be wrong on a contrarian show. Your contrarianness isn't expected to work out.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then as Alex mentioned, we are joined by Nolan Kelly, who does the From the Slot column for us every week at Awesemo.com, breaks down some game theory stuff, gives some interesting views that you might not be thinking of amidst all the information we have out there. So how's it going, Nolan? How are you feeling on this first show?
I'm feeling good. Yeah, let's get into it. It's kind of a weird slate this week, with so many of the best games kind of outside the main slate. So I'm curious to hear your takes.
And Nolan also super Canadian, as you might be able to tell already, right?
Is that right? They get the accent. You're probably gonna hear a bunch.
Yeah, immediately. I knew because of the spelling in the From the Slot column, where you're spelling ton with an N and an E, like it's an old timey shop.
I'm always wary of that. Like, do I throw the U in color, or people are just gonna think I'm an idiot?
A U in color is fine, but the N and an E on the end of things is what really throws me off because it feels like I'm reading like Victorian writing. Is how I feel about that.
It must be like the French Canadian influence.
You know what? You're a more dignified gentleman than hungover Evan Silva was last weekend, so I think we're making progress. Nice. And today is my birthday, guys. So I just want you to, if you want to chime in with every point I make and say great point, Spags, or hadn't thought of that one, you're really good at this thing, Spags. Feel free to make me feel good about myself. My picks are going to be great anyway because I have that birthday juju. But if
nice.
You want
Happy birthday, man!
Thanks. I just wanted to get that on the air. I wanted to feel
good. Yeah. Happy birthday, man. It's too bad it wasn't tomorrow because you want your big juju on the day when you can win $1 million, not the day when there's no games even happening.
I think a birthday weekend counts. I think that hopefully there'll be carryover. We have a lot of weird contrarian opinions we're going to throw out there today. So I do think that the odds of one of them panning out should be great. Let's talk about the guy right up front who I think is going to be the highest owned player on the slate according to our projections at Awesemo.com. And again, if you're not a member of Awesemo.com, we do give a free 1-week trial to everybody there in which we are giving all the ownership projections, Awesemo's rankings, premium content, projections from the FanVice guys as well, or former FanVice guys now. So go check that out. Promo code Contrary will get you 1 week free. Join us, learn all the information we're discussing. Todd Gurley, his price is down a little bit after a week in which everybody saw him go nuts in Denver. Over $10,000 last week on DraftKings. This time he's back under $10,000. We're currently projecting for over 50% ownership, which right away is an uncomfortable amount. Alex, how would you handle the situation given the fact that he is by far, I would say, the best running back in terms of opportunity and talent on the slate, but also very expensive and going to be highly owned?
Yeah, I mean, Todd Gurley is definitely going to be really popular, probably the most popular. I think we have projected for almost 50% on DraftKings and 56% on FanDuel. My general feeling about guys like this is that the field is pretty much adjusted correctly. So 50% of the time, if he scores above his projection, like that's going to be really good. So I don't see a lot of edge in playing him or fading him. So I'm really going to not really focus on that decision. I'm going to put him in if the rest of my lineup dictates that I have enough salary. But I'm not going to be going out of my way to fit him in.
Nolan, how are you feeling about Todd Gurley given the prospect of him being so highly owned and so expensive?
Yeah, obviously a pretty smash spot here. 10-point road favorites against a defense that isn't great against running backs. I feel like also the Carlos Hyde trade is probably going to increase his ownership as well because now people can kind of plug in that cheap running back to sort of pair with him. So I kind of agree. Like I always just tend to go with the fade when it hits that high ownership, but it's probably, Alex is probably right. It's probably just a zero-sum game at that point. But anything can happen, right? 50%. You can eliminate a lot of your competition by not rostering him as well if he doesn't perform up to his value.
So the contrarian play would just be to assume that he has a congenital heart defect, and then Malcolm Brown comes in. That's what I'm going to be doing.
I like
I will not be playing Malcolm Brown. I will have a ton of Gurley too. I think that's fair. I mean, some guys deserve the price. I think much like Kamara did earlier in the year where he had the role he had with Mark Ingram on the sidelines. I think Gurley makes sense. Let's talk about the other part of the game because as we've discussed before on the show, if there is a high-owned guy, one of the natural pivots you can make in football is trying to find the scoring expected in the matchup from somewhere else. Jared Goff is currently expected to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate, but he's still much lower owned than Gurley. How do we feel about his prospects, Alex?
I feel like he's definitely a top quarterback this week. I found more with quarterbacks than other positions. You can just play the guys who have the highest projection and end up pretty good. I have him as an 8 points grade on both sites, so that's definitely elite. And then the thing I like about him this week is that there are really good options to pair with him because Cooper Kupp is out, so you can get Woods and Cooks, who probably will have a slight bump in target share. Gurley as well catches a lot of passes, and if you're feeling really sneaky, I guess you could get Josh Reynolds in, but I might not be trying to dig that deep there.
Yeah, I do think we do have Josh Reynolds projected to get about 7% ownership right now. Obviously, that can change a little over the course of the next 24 hours. But Reynolds, I think one thing I read, which actually might have been in Evan Silva's matchup column, so he gets a little plug even though he's not here. I think that what he thinks and what a lot of smart football people think is that Josh Reynolds will be used similarly to how they used Equinominus St. Brown, who I played last week, and I still don't remember his name. I know it starts with an EQ. It's enough. But basically, that side going against Richard Sherman has been mostly a decoy because Sherman's been actually pretty effective. And the hope is that Cooks and Woods would be running on the other side of the slot. To me, I like the idea of just going with an onslaught approach here over the Rams. I think people think this game might be competitive, and I get why. But I think the Rams might end up just smoking them completely across the board, putting up touchdowns in the air and the ground and on defense. And I kind of like that approach to get to this total while also, getting exposure to the game and differentiating. Nolan, what would you do? Yeah, go ahead.
I got to jump in here. You must not have seen the game the other night with San Francisco and Green Bay because CJ Beathard is the GOAT now.
That's true. My bad. I need to adjust for this world where CJ Beathard is an elite quarterback.
I'm curious. I feel like this is an interesting game because the maybe I don't know what Beathard's ownership is, but you could kind of attack it that way. Pair him up with Kittle, who's got double A grade Osmo's rankings, and actually, Pierre Garçon actually has a decent matchup. I don't. He's running against Troy Hill, who is allowing a league worst 0.7 points per fantasy route run. So obviously good ones like a boom or bust play, and that's like a perfect GPP play. And Garçon kind of looks washed. So if you're going to stack this game, I think maybe you might be getting Garçon at very low ownership. And I agree on Josh Reynolds. I think it's probably going to be a decoy play. He's probably going to be lining up against Richard Sherman, who's like the number 1 ranked PFF corner in the entire league this year, which is kind of crazy considering everyone also said he's washed. But it's interesting because I never know how to attack the Rams because although their offense is so concentrated with all 3 of those top receivers getting a 96% snap share, now with Kupp out, it might be a little bit more centralized. You could possibly fade Gurley, put in Woods and Cooks, and then kind of pair that with Kupp and hope that sort of allows you to be a little bit contrarian and not own Gurley.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's definitely a line of approach that I'll roll out a couple times as well. Cooks and Woods, both have had about a 25% target share thus far. Cooper Kupp not far behind. So a ton of targets up for grabs. And those 2 guys have shown to be able to handle volume in different ways and get downfield as well. A ton of air yards per target. So there's a lot of ways to go here, but I think you need to have some exposure to this matchup this week to win. That would be how I feel about it. Alex, what games are you looking at that are under the radar for you so far?
Well, one game, this is kind of contingent on some injury information, so I'm going to throw that caveat out immediately. But I noticed that one of the lowest totals on the game is one of my favorites again. Washington with Alex Smith, they're facing Dallas, a 41.5 total. But the reason I like the game is because Paul Richardson and Jamison Crowder are out. And the injury I'm really looking at is Chris Thompson. He's questionable game time decision. So whether I play this game will also be a game time decision. Um, but I think in the absence of their two top receivers or wideouts, that makes the other guys pretty well priced with Maurice Harris being like 3K on DraftKings. Adrian Peterson looks pretty good if Thompson is out. And of course, Jordan Reed with Richardson and Crowder out, I think he's going to get a lot of targets. And tight end is always a spot where having a good guy on your stack kind of helps with the roster construction.
Nolan, do you see any value in that game?
Jordan Reed's definitely intriguing with Richardson doubtful and Crowder out. Cole Beasley, he's got a tough matchup. I mean, he's also got a pretty good grade, I think, on Osmo. He has a tough matchup against Fabian Moreau, who's been one of the best slot corners in the league. I always seem to roster Reed, and he just Vernon Davis always gets it. Like I was all in on Reed last week, and Vernon Davis caught the touchdown. But I think there's obviously a lot of value in this game, even with the low total.
Yeah, I wanted to get there, and I do like Zeke on the other side, but a lot of people also like Zeke. We're projecting Ezekiel Elliott for over 25% ownership on DraftKings. So, a place that is not going to be too fresh if you're trying to go there, or contrarian if you want to stick to the title of the show. But Alex Smith has just been so bad, and the Cowboys defense is good and should be getting better with Sean Lee expected to be active this week. So I don't see this game that much. I get the logic for it. I get Smith's at a good price, and he just seems like he is due for some sort of regression to the mean. And they're back at home, which is great. But I don't think I think this Cowboys D is actually kind of good, especially against the pass. And that scares me with a guy like Alex Smith, who is preternaturally afraid of throwing the ball past 5 yards.
Yeah, I think the key is just the quarterback usually is kind of as good as in a stack as his receivers. So I'm really banking on the fact that with Thompson, Richardson, and Crowder out, these cheapies will kind of rise to the occasion. And the team total is 2/3 of some of the higher ones this week. But if the price is also 2/3, that's kind of a wash.
Yeah, I think that seems fair to me. And, again, we're talking about these things when we're obviously Alex is playing a ton of lineups. I'm also playing a bunch of lineups. I'm sure Nolan as well. So, these are things where if you're doing a single entry, maybe not Alex Smith. But if you're doing a bunch of entries, then it could be important to get a look at him given a matchup at home where nobody will be on him, under 2% ownership right now for us. Let's talk about a game with another shitty quarterback who I am a little more bullish on, which I talked about in the Slants and Go this week. I'm a little Bills crazy because I think, and I told Alex my theory before we went on the air, I think they've had so many bad quarterbacks that now they have a passable, let's say a 5 out of 10 quarterback. And they've been trotting out 2s and 3s for a while. And we're also going against an Indianapolis defense which gives up a ton of passing yards, has not been good, also throws a ton on their side. So they are playing with a bit of pace and a bit of volume that can put up points. Indianapolis giving up a 73% completion rate, giving up 7.4 yards per pass. Derek Anderson. What do we think about Derek Anderson? Nolan, any thoughts before Alex buries me?
Oh, I was hoping you're going to go to Alex here. He's the Kelvin Benjamin whisperer. So I don't know what to do with this game. I mean, I always like to kind of look at games where you don't really know what's going to happen, and it kind of depends on what the public perception is. I mean, look at Brock Osweiler last week, right? So he's obviously going to be low owned, and Indy is passing a ton. So it might be a situation where maybe Derek Anderson's better than what we think, and the Buffalo offense will be a little bit better and able to compete. I mean, this has sneaky shootout potential in this game. I don't quite know how to attack it.
Alex, what do you think?
I think there's potential because as we saw last week with Albert Wilson, just having the potential to get a large target share has that has a lot of upside kind of worked into it. So I think that Kelvin Benjamin, Zay Jones, and Charles Clay all are playable. I'm not crazy about it, but I think that you can go there, and maybe Derek Anderson is a little bit better than everyone's expecting, and it could work out pretty well.
Brandon Streak in the chat, can't be serious, Derek Anderson. If you pay that low, why go Anderson when you could use Beathard? Beathard is going to be about 8 to 10% owned. Derek Anderson is going to be under 1%. So that would be the reason why you go there. The point of the show is to be contrarian. And Derek Anderson, again, has had a big arm in the past. Obviously, he hasn't thrown a ton of passes the last few years. But, again, we're talking about a guy stepping into a role where it's just been so bad that any sort of professionalism can be a value add. So that's where I'm going with it. And the guys, Alex, that you mentioned are the guys who I would stack him with. Again, not going crazy on ownership here, but it takes a little bit of Derek Anderson to get above the field. I think LaShawn McCoy, too, actually expected to get some ownership, which is kind of surprising. He's closing in at 10% according to our projections. But he makes sense, too, because he'll get some dump-offs, too, from Anderson. It's not a great Indy defense. That's all I'm saying.
Do you guys have any hot takes on T.Y. Hilton coming off that hamstring injury?
Alex, what do you think?
He hasn't really been jumping out for me. Let's see. Let me check my grades. The projection looks good, but 7,300 on FanDuel is a little high compared to some of the alternatives, and on DraftKings he's 6,200, which looks a little better. So that could be a good contrarian play if he's low owned.
Yeah, Hilton is coming back into a role where people still think he's getting deep balls. He's not getting targeted that deep at all. He's getting targeted 9.8 yards down the field. So Buffalo's defense, which has actually been very good against the deep ball, I think they actually haven't given up a deep touchdown, is what I was reading this morning. For them, I don't think Hilton, like people expecting the classic Hilton role where he's going to get you 5 catches for 150 yards. Don't expect that. But he can get enough targets and do damage in the short game, I think, to be useful. I won't play a ton of him, but I do think, running it back with him, if you do believe in the Derek Anderson hype train, which I am single-handedly driving off a cliff, I think I think that you might have a little bit of him that might be useful. Let's talk about another game. Actually, Nolan, what about you? Are there any games that jump out to you before we jump into one that I think is also going unrecognized?
I just lost my chat here. I don't know what's going on. Okay, there we go. So I'm kind of curious about the New Orleans-Baltimore game. That's sort of the one that I'm looking at the most, just in terms of a full contrarian stack. You have some really cheap wide receiver options for Baltimore, all in the 5,000 range. You get the Willie Snead revenge game narrative. And then on the New Orleans side of the ball, obviously Baltimore's defense has been historically great this season, but they've also haven't really played a lot of they haven't played a murderer's row of offenses. I think it's like Cleveland, Buffalo, Tennessee. So I'm curious, I think the public perception is that Baltimore's defense is historically great, and they might not be. So I think you could probably get some of these New Orleans players, though they aren't great values, you could probably get them at pretty low ownership. And it's a pretty concentrated stack always with New Orleans as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a classic does defense matter spot, which Alex, you've given your opinions on in the past. What do you think about the Saints and I guess the Ravens in this matchup?
So I definitely like the Saints. I mean, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, Drew Brees is the greatest passer of all time, right? So, but it is kind of amazing that they're a 3-point underdog to Baltimore. But what I think is going to happen is Brees is going to pass even more than he normally would. So I think the amount of yards might be like kind of comparable to his normal performances, a little bit less. But that still leaves a lot of production for guys like Thomas and Kamara. And I think at lower ownership, those are definitely some guys I'll want to target.
So I'll go through the spiel, but I had it in my column and it just blew me away. So I use a sheet, like a data sheet, which has the matchups and whatever, and is color coded to show like which teams are good, which teams I should avoid. The Baltimore defense right now in this matchup, the best team on the slate in terms of yards per game with 271 per game. In terms of yards per pass, they're the best with 5.3 yards per pass. In terms of completion rate allowed, they're the best with 55.6% completion rate allowed. In terms of passing TDs allowed, they're the best, 2.8% passing TDs allowed. In terms of drive score allowed, so the opponent scoring on drives, they're the best with 20.3%. They also deflect the most passes at 18.2%, and they get the most sacks at about 11% of dropbacks. They're getting a sack. So this is a real, I think, perfect does defense matter spot to me. The New Orleans defense is so bad. On the other side, they're one of the worst in pretty much all those categories I just listed. So I think it can shoot out, but I also don't hate the idea of playing the Baltimore defense here at very cheap. Breeze does drop back a ton. He's a great quarterback, but that doesn't mean he won't throw a pick or two, especially in a hostile Baltimore environment. It's interesting to me, and I think the Baltimore defense is playable.
Well, here's the thing, Chris. Michael Thomas on the year has a 93.9% catch rate. So even if Baltimore is so good, they force him to miss twice as many passes. He's still catching 85% of his passes.
Fair.
That's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, no, that would still be a very high catch rate.
If you guys were to stack it, who would you bring it back with? Do you think Snead seems to have the best matchup, but
I'm a big John Brown guy, and if he's the lowest owned of those three, given the fact that he gets deep and I think he has the best rapport with Flacco too, I would definitely be the guy. That would be the guy I would go with.
Highest upside.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that Baltimore spreads it around a little bit too much. The Crabtree got a ton of targets the other game. So I think that none of the guys are really that appealing outside of a stack. But you gotta have someone go off to have a shootout if you have Breeze. So are you guys only doing it in game stack?
No, I think you play guys as one-offs too, but I think it's viable to go both ways in this matchup. Like I have a little bit of one-off Kamara, even though I think the Baltimore defense is good. I think that's actually why I would favor Kamara a little, because he needs to get the ball in those slivers of space and make more out of it. But yeah, I think you can go either way, like a Flacco Brown stack without stacking it on the other side. I think is okay. Let's see. Baltimore's played two rookies, Mariota, Peterman. They also played Andy Dalton, who got a little more out of there, but still had a pretty tough sledding there. Again, I don't think that it's a matchup that is padded by bad quarterbacks against them. Brandon Streak in the chat pointing out Willie Snead for all the narratives, birthday week, revenge game, and parents in attendance.
Wow.
Big week for
I hadn't had that in my model, but now I'm all in.
We advertise that you count for all these things, Alex. I think you need to account for more birthday weeks and parents in attendance.
We're going to have to stop advertising that I count for birthdays. That's false advertising.
Whenever there's a player's birthday, that's what we should target. Learn which player's birthday it is today and who to play in DFS.
It's very tricky because, some players celebrate a whole birthday weekend, but others only celebrate their birthday. So you got to know which day they're celebrating.
That is actually the core tenet of winning at DFS, right, Alex?
Yeah. I mean, also the parents in attendance. Maybe he has a little low self-esteem. Having his parents there to kind of cheer him up, that could be big.
I agree. TJ104, they didn't do much defensively versus Ben Dalton. The point is that they're around the passes enough to create that opportunity. And that's what you're looking for, is you want them to be able to deflect passes and to generate a rush. And I think if they can do both those things, again, you also have Breeze outside. His worst game of the year was in New York playing outside. There's a lot of stuff there, which I think can be bad for Breeze, even if he'll still kind of have his day because he is Drew Brees. No denying that. Speaking of a guy who'll have his day versus another defense who's gotten a lot of hype, this is a game I'm interested in a lot. Maybe not a lot, but enough to get above the field. New England at Chicago, I think is pretty interesting to me. Chicago coming off of a matchup in Miami, which could be kind of an island matchup where they just looked bad and they weren't prepared for Brock Osweiler. You can't prepare enough for Brock Osweiler. We all know that. But I think this matchup versus Brady, Khalil Mack's still hurt, missed 2 practices this week with that ankle injury that's just bugging him. I think he is an important part of this defense. And if he's not at 100% versus Tom Brady, of all people, I think he's going to get picked apart. Brady is under 5% ownership. Gordon also very low owned. Edelman also pretty low owned. I think you go a bunch of different ways here, and they're going to have to get the ball down the field somehow. And I think it's going to be Brady through the air. Alex, what do you think about the New England-Chicago matchup?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tough matchup for New England. If Khalil Mack is out, that alleviates some of the concern. But the thing is, Josh Gordon, I feel like since he played like 90% of the snaps, kind of replaced Dorsett in their wide receiver rotation. Having a quarterback like Brady throwing to him is only going to make him more of like a fantasy asset. And his price is only $5,600 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it is $6,700, so a little bit higher. But I think that he has the potential to be an elite wide receiver. Right now, I have him projected as a very good wide receiver. So I think that I'm definitely going to be looking at him, as well as Edelman, who's kind of a consistent fantasy producer.
Any Gronk for you? I know he's picking up the most ownership out of the Pats on this side, and he's very cheap on DraftKings, down to 6,000. Hasn't really looked himself, or like they don't want to get him involved as much because they don't want to get him hurt this early in the year, and I don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, that's one. It's a tough one because if you're just going off this year's stats, he's going to look like a really bad play. And I tend to believe that this year's stats are the most indicative. If you go back to previous years, that might throw you off more than it helps you. Obviously, we know Gronk has been a huge performer in the past, but I'd be inclined to kind of wait and see a little bit if he's going to get it going this season again.
Is this, Alex, is this the only sport where you advocate for a kind of shorter window to judge somebody's role?
It depends, like, on the stats. So what I'm going off is like the target share in Gronk's case, and I'm concerned. It's not like he's been getting the targets and hasn't been producing. He just hasn't been getting nearly as big a target share as he normally does. So until I see like some shift in that, I'm going to be kind of under the field, I guess.
And what about thoughts on Chicago running it back with them?
I think that Mitch Trubisky is one of the greatest quarterbacks in the league because I think last time I looked, his quarterback rating on the year is about 105, which puts him in some elite company. But I think more seriously, if I had to run it back, I'd probably go with Taylor Gabriel just based on the price.
Nolan, what do you think about this game overall?
Yeah, like Josh Gordon's interesting. It's kind of one of those situations where you want to be a week early rather than a week late, right? I think 7 targets last game. Him and Edelman both got 7+ targets, I think, last game. So they're definitely starting to work him into the offense. And he'll probably be matched up against Prince Amukamara, which is not great, not bad, but I definitely think like that. It seems like with Cordell Patterson now and Dorsett gone, you're going to start seeing a little bit more of a concentrated offense on the Pats. So this might be a good spot to jump in. This game also kind of has a sneaky shootout potential as well. 49-point total. Allen Robinson, I just read, tweaked his groin, so that you got to bump Gabriel up a little bit more as well. And like I'm interested in your thoughts on Tariq Cohen at around 5,100 on DK. He got a 50% snap share last game. He seems to be starting to take over a little bit of the lead back, or at least a little bit more of a timeshare with Howard. Is he viable at that price, or would you just use him in stacks?
What do you think, Alex?
I think that he's definitely viable. He's shown up on my crunches. The one comment I have is that I don't really think that 50% snap rate is sustainable just because he's such a small guy. And in the NFL, I feel like they tend to use those guys a little bit less just because they have more injury risk. But I think if Chicago is behind, that you could definitely see Cohen have a big game where he's catching a lot of passes out of the backfield.
Yeah, I think the one thing to note too, which Evan might have had in his matchups column on Roto World as well, Tariq Cohen just seems like a pretty good matchup fit for New England, whose biggest flaws really been their slow linebacker core. Cohen getting the ball in space is really dangerous, and I think he could just pick up chunks of yards at a time, as could Taylor Gabriel. So I actually like both those guys if we are running back this game. I think Cohen and Gabriel are good. I'd prefer to have Allen Robinson in the lineup. Somebody in the chat, who is it? XTJ104 is saying Gabriel is an even better play if Allen Robinson misses. I actually don't agree with that because you want to have that guy drawing some attention elsewhere. I think if Allen Robinson missed, I'd be more inclined to go to Anthony Miller or whoever the fuck else is down that depth. I don't even know offhand. But I think overall, I just like you want to have a guy drawing attention away, and Allen Robinson is a big enough target. If he does play too, 3% ownership on Allen Robinson, a little interesting given that he has been highly targeted in the past. And even though Taylor Gabriel is playing the Tyreek Hill role in this Matt Nagy offense, I think that Robinson and Jordan Howard, honestly, like you should have a lot of exposure if you are mass multiply-entering these guys because they're very low owned in a matchup where that team needs points.
Yeah, actually, the previous weeks I've been kind of critical of your love of Jordan Howard. But I think this week I can support it because his price has dropped down from 6,500 to 5,500.
Mm.
And I think that that's enough to make him in play. Just hoping that the Bears can be in the lead. I think he'll get a lot of snaps if that's the case, and a lot of production.
Yeah, I mean, the New England defense not giving up a ton of rushing touchdowns, actually giving up under 1% rushing TD rate on opponents' attempts. But I think Jordan Howard, I mean, yeah, the price, like you mentioned last week, his price, and you actually convinced me out of playing more of him last week because you were right. His price didn't drop. Now that his price has dropped, he's still going to get a shot. He's not getting involved in the passing game, which sucks. And, that was sort of the goal going into the season, was to get him involved in the passing game. But one of these weeks, he's going to have a 2 TD, 80-yard game, and it could be this week.
Yeah, I mean, if the Bears continue to use him like they have in the past, like it hasn't materialized in the big games this year. Well, last year, he'd have games where he'd rush like a zillion times and have huge fantasy performances. And I think that could happen pretty easily this year as well.
Let's talk about another game who we've kind of touched around a little bit. One of the highest owned projected games on the slate, and I think the highest overall total. I don't have the math in front of me right now. Cleveland at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's defense has been very bad. They fired their defensive coordinator, Mike Smith, and bringing in their linebacker coach, who has been a career linebacker coach. Is Todd Duffner his name? I don't have it in front of me. Duffner is definitely his last name, though. Not a guy with any proven track record. The last time he was a DC was in Cincinnati in 2002, and they were not very noteworthy as a defense at that point. I don't see him being the panacea to whatever ails the Tampa Bay defense. So I'm all over Cleveland. Nick Chubb, a lot of people be all over, but I don't think people are going to own him enough, potentially, based on our projections. We have him projected for under 25% ownership right now. I mean, is it possible that gets up to 40, 50? I don't know. What do we think about this game, Alex?
I think it's going to be the game of the week as far as ownership, just because it has like the second highest total by 1 point. Oh wait, is the Kansas City game on the slate?
No.
Okay. So it has the second highest total. It's a pretty small spread relatively, and I think Nolan's right that Carlos Hyde being traded is going to lead to a lot more opportunity here and a lot more ownership. Because Duke Johnson and Nick Chubb were priced with the idea that he'd play. I think with him out, their opportunity is going to be a lot bigger.
Are you comfortable playing Chubb at volume, given the outlook there? To me, it seems kind of like one of those NBA plays, and obviously we do a lot of NBA DFS as well, where you have a guy stepping into a starting role. There's going to be some degree of production coming out of him or some degree of opportunity. I find him, I'm comfortable locking him, but I feel like I shouldn't be.
I think the thing is, I don't have him projected for a lot of points, but for his salary, he's a great value, and that's the kind of player that I tend to end up with if he's low on. But if the ownership starts moving towards Chubb, I think that having a high owned guy with a low projection, despite the value, can be kind of a bad spot.
So I guess in terms of overall numbers, how would you approach that if you were a person entering, like you may be, 150 lineups and he's going to be 25% owned? Where would you try to come in on the field with him?
Yeah, that'd be tough. If he's 25% owned, I think that would be too high. I think let's see what. He is 22% projected on DraftKings. I see. Okay, so I would be more interested in Duke Johnson, I suppose, because he's half the ownership. I think he will get some of the work that Hyde was getting. And the fact that he catches a lot of passes out of the backfield is really good because it provides a little bit of extra variance, which is good if you're in a GPP.
Yep, I agree. And also, I guess if you did want to pivot, somebody in the chat saying, and he was my guy last week, my contrarian RB pick, Peyton Barber on the other side, similarly priced at home, going against the Cleveland team, which has been bad versus the run, but better versus the pass, giving up 4.7 yards per rush and 3.9% rushing TD rate for opponents. Barber got his touches up. He looked good last week. I think he's interesting. Nolan, what do you think about the Chubb dilemma? Let's call it that.
I like that Barber call too. He's a little bit sneaky on this slate. I don't know how they're going to use him, but I'm curious about Chubb because like he has one target this season. Obviously, he wasn't getting a huge snap rate, so like I don't know if they're going to use him in the passing game, and if they're not going to use him in the passing game, then that obviously lowers his floor a lot. So like it could just be like Duke Johnson's going to be coming in on third downs. I'm not sure. So I do think like if the ownership gets up too high, then I don't mind fading Nick Chubb. And then like the Cleveland receivers here are intriguing. We get Landry who's getting like averaging 10, 11, 12, 14 targets in the last 4 games, going up against the worst slot corner in the entire NFL, MJ Stewart. He's allowed more yards per snap than anyone in the NFL. And then, of course, Njoku has got 30 targets in the last 3 weeks, going up against the 31st ranked defense against tight ends. So obviously the ownership is following these guys. I know this is a contrarian show, but I wonder and Landry's priced up, but I'm wondering how you guys are going to attack this. Like it seems like these matchups are really, really plush spots for Landry and Njoku.
I can tell you I'm playing right now. So I've done maybe like half my lineup so far. I'm going to play a lot of Damian Ratley, to be honest. I think he looked really good in that run last week. He got a ton of targets. He seemed to me like he was kind of doing the Antonio Callaway role that we expected, where he was going to have that vibe with Baker. And the catch rate difference, you could tell too. Ratley's caught 75% of the balls. What is that?
He actually knows how to play football.
Yeah.
I've been rostering that guy for I've kept him on my rosters. I think those like Tyrod Taylor missed throws early on in the season just threw me off, and I'm done. I'm done with Callaway. I think you're right.
It hasn't gotten better, and I thought it would because Callaway, in theory, should have had more second team reps with Baker, and I thought coming in it was going to be like that vibe. And they have not vibed at all. Like I was gonna say, Ratley's got a 75% catch rate from Baker. Callaway on the season is 39% catch rate overall. Oof. And Landry too has not been catching at the same rate he has either. It's just like nobody's vibing with Baker besides Ratley and Njoku. And Ratley is currently projected for under 3% ownership, very cheap. I like him a lot. I'm going to play a stupid amount of him and probably regret it, but I think he just looks really good to me.
Good contrarian take.
Thank you. So you playing any Damian Ratley? You on the rat train? You're the rat.
He is popping up a little bit in my projections, but I do prefer Landry and Callaway. Landry obviously has a huge projection this week. Callaway, I think his catch rate is abysmal this year so far, but being up against Tampa Bay, who's one of the weaker passing defenses in the league, might be the boon he needs to his performance. So I think he's worth considering this week.
Chubb didn't catch passes in college. Neither did Todd Gurley, ex-TJ 104, and they both went to the same college. So how'd that work out? Not even being a dick, but that's Georgia, man. They don't do that. Richard Wilson asking Alex, when he says you're more interested in Duke, does that mean Chubb fade or just reduced ownership?
Well, I have to say Chubb is going to be really good in cash games. I haven't really decided for sure whether I'm going to have him in tournament lineups, but he's not my favorite play this week.
Okay. No, that's fair. One thing too, just please throw us a like. That is something that helps out the channel a lot, gets us bumped up in searches and all that. And we're grinding on a Saturday just like you are. So please throw us a like on the channel. We appreciate your support and tuning in for us, but the likes we appreciate. It's like that much more. What about Jameis in this matchup versus Cleveland team? They're weird. They give up a ton of yards, but they've actually been pretty good in all the metrics I look at as being important. Limiting completion rate, getting pass deflections, not sacking a ton, which is probably the issue. What are you doing with Jameis on that side, Alex?
I think he's definitely in play. There's some really good receiving options. I think Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, and OJ Howard are all pretty good plays this week. And I gotta give you some credit because you nailed Peyton Barber last week. I had Ronald Jones, and that was a disaster.
That felt honestly, I felt good going against you on that because I knew it was a tough spot.
I'm pretty sure it's a 50-50, but it worked out for you this time.
My coin flip game is the second to none.
But yeah, apparently he still had the confidence of the training staff. I was pretty off on my read there. So I think that this week, again, Peyton Barber is also in play.
Yeah, I thought Barber looked good last week, and I thought it was sort of a role asserting kind of game for him, where Ronald Jones came in, did nothing. Barber came in, looked sharp, was getting sharp cuts. I think he had a drop maybe in the pass game, which is not my ideal, but better at pass protection as well, which can be a helpful asset versus a Cleveland team who's been pretty stout versus the pass game. What about Mike Evans going against Denzel Ward? He's been very good in coverage recently, and Evans coming off of a down week. I feel like he should have some appeal. Is he a guy you'll have any of this week, Alex?
Yeah, definitely. Just because this game stack is so appealing, I'm expecting to have a lot of the different guys. I have Mike Evans as A in points and C in value on both sites. So I think that I'm going to target him a lot more in the game stack than I will as a one-off.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Deshaun, too, is a guy I like as part of the game stack. I think Deshaun can get deep. He's getting a little better vibe with Jameis Winston than he's had in the past, so that's intriguing to me. Nolan, what are you doing with the Tampa Bay side?
I don't know. I never quite understand how to attack Tampa, just because they seem to spread the ball around so much. You pretty much have like Humphreys and now was stealing targets. Godwin obviously, Evans, Brait, Howard. Like it seems like there's so many viable options for Winston, and I don't really know. Like obviously outside of Evans, I don't really know how that breaks down. So I think you're kind of better off maybe just playing the ownership and just sort of. If you're not game stacking, just sort of have sprinkle in some of these options and hope. Like obviously Jackson's probably the best GPP option, but I don't know. I'm not sure how to stack the Tampa offense.
Thoughts on Chris Godwin? Brandon's asking in the YouTube chat. I think Chris Godwin, I think the issue with him is he's not getting enough routes run, is what I've read a bunch. And I think from what I've seen too, like Godwin's very effective, but he's just not high enough in the pecking order. So I'm more comfortable with Deshaun. As XTJ in the chat points out, the Browns will be without their number 2 corner. So there is a lot of reasons to go with Djax and maybe consider a little less Mike Evans. But, Evans off a down week where a lot of people had him, and including myself. I think that's kind of the spot where you love to have Evans.
What's Evans' ownership at?
We are currently projecting Evans for a hair under 10% on DK.
Not bad.
Reasonable.
Yeah.
Deshaun under 5 though.
In that top tier, I really like Michael Thomas at kind of the same ownership though, because over the year he's been a better performer, and so I like him in the game stack, but I think there's some really good options at the high tier this week that are also kind of contrarian.
Yep, I think that's fair. Let's talk about the Minnesota Jets game. There's some concerns about wind in this game, which people in the chat have raised. Adam Thielen projected to be one of the highest owned players on the slate at wide receiver, obviously just tearing it up this year. Wind, one thing which I feel like we've said is not the best to have in your game. The Jets have been pretty competent at home as well. But I think this game actually has a little bit of shootout potential. But what do we think about the wind, Alex?
Oof. I mean, to be honest, I've seen the same thing in forecasts, but I'm a little bit skeptical of the accuracy of like a wind forecast. It's like a whole day in advance. Like if you think about it, like the biggest place in sports that is relevant is Wrigley Field, and odds makers won't even put out a line for that game until like maybe like 8 to 10 hours before the game, because there's just so much uncertainty. So I'm gonna take a wait and see. I just don't think there's enough information to really say it's gonna be really good or really bad conditions right now.
So are you comfortable playing Thielen then? I mean, I would play Thielen anyway because I don't think he's getting targeted deep enough where the win would be an issue for me. Like he is a slot guy who's getting targeted as kind of the safety blanket guy. He just happens to be targeted 13 times a game in that role. But I think for me, even the win wouldn't be an issue there. The issue that would be there for me is Thielen is projected for about 30% ownership right now. I love the guy. I think he's great. I'll still play him, but 30%'s tough. How would you handle that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, he's had 6 100-yard games in a row. So, I mean, the odds that he's going to get 100 yards this week are about 100%, right?
That's how it works. It just keeps rolling.
Good math.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, unless there's some kind of crazy wind, I think he's going to be one of the top options this week.
Yeah, I agree there. What do you think, Nolan, about the game?
I'm curious about like a Cousins Diggs Thielen stack here. I see Diggs' ownership is sub 10%. So I kind of think like I always love to stack the Vikings just because they're so concentrated and and especially in situations where they aren't being overly owned. And then like I don't know how to approach like Latavius Murray is obviously pretty cheap, so it'll kind of dictate his ownership. He's not getting a lot of targets though, right? So but he had like games. He had one game where he had seven or targets when Cook was out. So I'm kind of I don't know if he's like viable in that stack or if it's just more of a Cousins Diggs Thielen. And then obviously you can bring it back with Curse, who's like Robbie Anderson's going to get Xavier Rhodes. So sorry, I just lost my notes here. Yeah, so Robbie Anderson gets Rhodes and Curse is filling in for Nunwa, 4,100. Is he like cash game lock for you guys? Coming off like a 10 target performance in a pretty plush matchup.
What do you think, Alex?
Oh man, I'm a little bit behind here because I didn't even realize Cook was out. Last time I read, he was questionable. So let me take a look here. 6,500 on FanDuel. I think that let me check here.
Latavius did get back on track last week too. Just to throw that out real fast because it might have gone under the radar. Latavius had a pretty nasty week.
Yeah, for sure. So I think on FanDuel he's a little overpriced. The thing is, although he might be good, I think there's some really great options this week at running back that are around the same price range. We went over Chubb and Duke Johnson, but one other guy I like is another Johnson, Kerryon Johnson. I think with Theo Riddick out, he's going to be in a huge spot this week for the Lions.
Wait, did you just switch the topic with us? We were talking about Minnesota.
Got enough of this game.
Yeah, that was a real boss move. Like, not be Jets and Minnesota assholes. We're talking about Kerryon.
Oh, I thought we were just talking about Latavius Murray. Yeah.
No, we're talking about the Vikings Jets game and its potential to shoot out. And I think Nolan was asking your thoughts on Jermaine Kearse in the cash game in particular.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about Latavius Murray.
You take the game. You take the show wherever you want. Spoilers, though. Now we know your pick.
Oh man, I blew my load too early. So
that's actually how I got here on my birthday. So convenient.
We all know that's not true.
I was a fast swimmer when I was a little sperm.
So Chris isn't really popping out too much to me at this point. Just because I think Robbie Anderson, Terrell Pryor, Andre Roberts are kind of in the mix too. So
Pryor's supposed to be out too, I think.
Oh, Pryor's, man, I just like looked at every game except this one.
A lot of injuries.
Everything.
You weren't ready for the Jets game. You gotta watch your Jets closely. I like the Jets a lot. So I think the Jets are an interesting spot. Darnold's been really good the last 2 weeks. I mean, relative to a rookie QB, at least in terms of limiting mistakes. He's not a super viable fantasy QB yet, just because he's not getting enough yards and they're playing him low risk. But I love Kearse this week. I think the Vikings have given up the fourth most yards to slot receivers. Kearse will be playing out of the slot, so he'll avoid Xavier Rhodes. And Kearse picked up a ton of targets last week. Noah Nunwa, who has been a target monster. And Kearse actually looked better in the Nunwa role of being Darnold's kind of safety blanket all over the field. So Kearse, so this is actually my issue of the week. It's like I have too many cheap guys, and I feel like that's what's screwing me up. And I know that's going to be my death is I'm going to have Damian Ratley and Kearse and Chubb in the same lineup and Tarek Anderson at QB. What a group. What a motley crew. But
that's what I kind of thought this slate was looking that way. Like so many of these cheap receivers, and then like you only have your like two sure thing running backs, and now maybe that's cheap with like Elliott and Gurley, and then I thought everyone was going to pay down for like Kearse and Goodwin and Beasley and all. There's like 7 viable guys in that range. I can't remember a slate where I was shocked at that. So like I think that you're going to see a lot of ownership down here. Not to.
Oh wow, the Jets just released Terrell Pryor actually, so that's
no way.
Wow,
that's a level beyond. That's surprising. It must have done something not great, given that they have no receivers.
Man, now I'm feeling even worse about my read here.
Well, that happened once on our NBA Lock show where I picked a guy at the end of the NBA season where I had Tim Quarterman on the Rockets and he got released right before the game. And I was like, yeah, you plug him in, he's starting, like whatever. And then he got released right at the second after lock.
That was game 82 too, right? That day is
Yeah.
just nuts.
Which, it's a narrow time then, so you got to really go in on your guys who you feel like are going to start and play. And Tim Quarterman was just in the locker room getting ready, and you're like, no man. So sorry, Terrell Pryor, I relate. Oh boy, what a situation. But yeah, Jermaine Kearse I think is a lock, and I think a great GPP play as well. A lock in cash and a good GPP play would be what I would say. Let's talk about, there's one question in chat. Oh, thoughts on the Lions receivers. We have Detroit heading into Miami. We'll touch on our contrarian picks right after this one. This will be the last game we cover. But drop your questions in chat, too. If there's anything good, I'll hit it before we wrap up. What do we think about this Detroit-Miami game? Miami obviously coming off of a surprising game versus Chicago where they look very competent. Brocktober in full effect. Brock looking good, throwing short passes, them limiting his deficiencies. Alex, what do you think about Detroit's prospects in Miami and Miami's prospects versus Detroit?
Well, I'd like to bring up a guy that no one has brought up on the show to this point, Kerryon Johnson. With Theo Riddick out, I expect him to get a lot of the passing downs, and LeGarrette Blount take some of the rushing work. But overall, I think that his stock has gone way up this week. And then the Lions guys are always gonna get yards because Stafford throws a ton, and then it's just a matter of price. So right now, Tate and Galladay are 6,400, 6,000 on DraftKings. I have them as B values. So I think those are some really good options this week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. I'll just throw out my take. Nolan, I'll turn it over to you, but I'll throw out one spicy take. I have some Detroit defense on the road this week. They're generating a ton of pressure on the QB. Miami kept Brock Osweiler clean last week, and I think a week of tape on how they did that is going to be an issue. I mean, I don't think Patricia's been a good coordinator in the past, but I do think a bye week plus film on a guy like Brock Osweiler is kind of a dangerous combination. So I like the pressure they could bring to Brock. I'll still play some Brock, like very, very little bits of him with Albert Wilson or Kenny Stills or Danny Amendola, who finally got his target share up because Brock Osweiler is afraid to throw deep. But I do think that Detroit defense, sort of low ownership, could be useful. What are you doing with this game, Nolan?
Oh, I like that take a lot, and they're only projected under 10% ownership. It looks like for that Lions D, and we all know the book on Brock Osweiler. I don't think there's any surprises there, even though he had a solid game last week. I'm interested to see what Albert Wilson's ownership is. Like he was only 47th in air yards last week, so I kind of think that if that creeps up and people are on him, then I will probably fade. Stay away from the backfield. I know you're getting a 50-50 share there, so I don't really like much on the Dolphins side of the ball here. On the Detroit Lions side, I think like both Galladay and Tate have pretty tough matchups. Tate's Minkah Fitzpatrick's been playing pretty well, and he's been covering the slot a lot. And Galladay gets Xavier Howard, who's I don't know, this year's it corner. So maybe I don't know if he's as good as everyone thinks he is, but and Marvin Jones is the lowest price of them all, but he's also getting the about 2/3 the target share of Tate. So it'll be interesting. I don't mind like throwing in, like Jones certainly has some GPP potential. He's leading the team in red zone targets, and he's the cheapest price, and he has the best matchup. So I don't mind throwing him in a few GPPs. Probably not going to get much ownership as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And also the Kerryon Johnson pick, which is, been discussed a little bit here by Alex, I think has been a very one would be very interesting to me rather. His ownership is a little higher than I would expect, but I think our projections on it rather are. But I do think the pass catching role for him could be useful, and he just needs more touches in any way he can get them. I think also coming off the bye, they've been committed to the idea of keeping a timeshare going, but I think once you get into the bye and you lose Theo Riddick, it just seems like it's naturally going to open up more opportunity for Johnson, which he will capitalize on at some point. One caveat about the Detroit defense, though, since I did just tout them right now, they have been really bad versus the run. So if the game script breaks the way of Frank Gore or Kenyon Drake, that could get away from them. But I'm banking on the pressure, getting there early, and us turning on the red zone and seeing the just Lions streaming down the field as Brock Osweiler holds his head in his hands on the sideline. You can envision it right now.
Here's the thing about Osweiler is I think he might be better than people think, because he was pretty good in Houston, and then he went to Denver and he was terrible. Case Keenum, really good in Minnesota, and then he went to Denver, he's terrible. So I'm thinking
Denver, good in Memphis.
Yeah, so I think this year Brock Osweiler, maybe he'll revert to his 2016 form. But more seriously, the problem with him is just that it's so hard to peg the production for the wideouts. There's a rotation of 4 guys. If Devontae Parker is active this week, that'd make it 5. So that's pretty tough.
I'm going to throw out one narrative thing, which is just me, just total conjecture. Don't go with anything that I'm going to say here. Brock Osweiler has been a guy who I feel like has been known to fall into the traps of the various cities he's been in, and I think has been a popular big man on campus type. 1 week in Miami, in which he's the belle of the ball and beats Chicago, all of a sudden he's out in Miami clubs all week, having a great week. Then he gets the Detroit defense with Matt Patricia and his big stupid beard, and he's ready, and I don't know. Just think about it.
Yeah, I mean, hiking was a big distraction for Osweiler in Denver. So now that he's in a more flat landscape, I think he'll do a lot better.
The guy just loves the great outdoors. He was at Red Rocks every time, getting lots of jam band shows in. Everyone hit that like button. Yes, Benjamin Schwab is right in the chat. Please help us out. Throw us a like. We're going to hit our last picks here. One quick question, though, which I think we should hit. Because
did we miss a game?
We don't go game by game here. We just kind of touched the game.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Don't make us do more work than we need, Nolan. That's
cool.
That's not where people are asking about Deshaun Watson in the chat. Deshaun Watson getting a matchup versus a Jags D that's been reeling, but is back at home this week. He is a play that people are going to play as a contrarian pick. What do we think about him? Nolan, I'll let you go first. Nolan? Nope. Do we lose Nolan?
Oh, I'll go first then. I think Watson's in play. Anyone who played fantasy NFL in 2017 knows you never do a full Watson fade. I particularly like Hopkins this week. I think that he's an even better play. So I think that there's definitely potential there, but it's not my favorite game stack.
Okay. Nolan, you back, or is he still frozen? No, he looks frozen. That's a very steely glare that Nolan has on his frozen face.
And
like blue steel.
Yeah, not sure what's happening here.
Blue steel.
Well, he was afraid of giving his contrarian picks. For me, though, I don't love Watson this week. I think that I actually played a little bit of Jags D just because I think they can get back on track this week. They haven't been good versus the pass, and which is surprising to me. They're also not generating a ton of rush, which also scares me. But the Texans have been so bad actually keeping Watson clean. I just think they have to get back on track this week. That team total seems to support as well Watson not breaking out. So I think it's totally viable to play him. It totally makes sense why you would want to. I would play him with Kiki QT out of anybody there because I think the slot is Jacksonville's one weakness. But I think it's more of a Jacksonville D game, at least in terms of limiting Watson from getting the kind of use that you would want to see. Nolan's stuck in the blue steel. It really is uncanny. That is straight Zoolander on Nolan's face. Let's do our picks, Alex, since we might not have Nolan back for the end here. Give me your contrarian QB pick.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little biased here because this guy won me a ton of money last year. But Alex Smith, I think not only is I feel like he has this reputation that everyone thinks he's like terrible at fantasy, but then a couple of times a year he'll have a breakout game. I'm not convinced it's going to be this week. It could be any week, but the prices of the players he's throwing to are just low enough that I think it's worth consideration.
For me, I'm going to go to Tom Brady, 4.8% projected ownership right now. We are projecting CJ Beathard for 8.1% ownership. Tom Brady, 4.8, CJ Beathard, 8.1. That tells me everything I need to know. It's a tough defensive slate for Tom Brady. And I do think I honestly have a sprinkling of Bears D just in case it goes south to protect myself here. But I don't see how Tom Brady doesn't figure it out. And this Patriots offense, who's so smart and so savvy, doesn't find a way to move the ball. So I'll take the upside there with Tom Brady. Running back, is it going to be Kerryon Johnson, Alex?
Well, looks like we got Nolan back. He's got shit.
Oh, now we got two Nolans. Now I'm Nolan.
I haven't looked at the ownership real close, so let me bring that up. Do you have anyone on top of your head?
For me at running back, I would probably say Peyton Barber again, which I know it's not. I'm not gonna pick him every week, I promise. But I do think in this particular matchup, honestly, there's a world and there are lineups of mine that exist which have both Nick Chubb and Peyton Barber. and then get weird in other spots with high-owned or high-priced guys. I think Peyton Barber's in a good spot. I think he cemented his role. I think Cleveland is bad versus the run, and if nothing else, he'll get a shot to punch a few in from the 1 yard line or 2 yard line. So I'm in on Peyton Barber again.
A couple guys I think are interesting. As I was talking about, I do like some of the chalkier picks at running back, but I think TJ Yeldon and Corey Clement are both kind of interesting because Yeldon, although next week with the Carlos Hyde in the picture, I don't think he's going to be nearly as good. I think he still has a lot of opportunity. And then Clement, he was kind of on a snap count last week, but had a pretty good game. So if he ends up getting the bigger workload between him and Wendell Smallwood, that could be a pretty big performance.
Yeah, I think that works for me. Is Nolan there or not? I see like my room and my shoulder in the video right now.
Might be coming here.
Well, maybe Nolan will give all his at the end if we get him back in. Yeah, by the way, somebody mentioning in the chat, Crowder leading by low air yards. Crowder is out for multiple weeks, so that's not the most helpful thing to turn to there. Let's talk about wide receivers. Who's my wide receiver pick? I actually don't know what that is offhand. I do mine in advance now because I don't want to be wrong. Oh, of course. Damian Ratley, my contrarian wide receiver pick. Gonna have a ton of him. I might be an idiot with him by the end of it all, but I liked what I saw on film, and I like the opportunity in front of him. Callaway just not reliable. Landry not reliable enough, surprisingly too. I trust the quarterback in a matchup who is going to be able to throw a ton. Even if he gets picked a bunch, he's still going to keep throwing. So Ratley would be my contrarian cheap pick. God, my salaries are a mess this week. Too many guys under 4,000. What about you, Alex, at wide receiver?
I think this one seems like it should be a lot higher owned than it is, but I really like Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon, both around 6% ownership. I think that Josh Gordon with Brady as the quarterback, and also his price hasn't risen to his 100% role in the offense. I think that he's particularly good, and then Edelman always has a pretty steady role, and his price is just in the mid-range. So I think he's pretty viable this week.
Yeah, and that supports my contrarian Tom Brady pick, so I'm all about that. One question from the chat, Alex, for you: would you play Duke Johnson and Nick Chubb in a lineup? Because people seem to be gravitating that way.
I think that you wouldn't want to do it in GPP because those players are anti-correlated, because I don't picture them being on many snaps together. It's possible, but in general, one's going to get more snaps than the other, and you want to pick the right one. I think it's harder for them both to have a game where they score 10 points higher than you project them for.
And here's an interesting one, which I guess we'll close out with from Brandon Reed. Who would be your all-in pick this week? If you had to push all your chips to the center, who would be the guy that you would, I guess maybe not, I don't want to say stake your reputation because there's so many different outcomes. We've talked about this, but if you had to push your chips in the middle on a guy, who would it be, Alex?
Man, this is the one that could come back to bite me, but it's hard to not be all in on Michael Thomas and his 93.9% catch rate. I mean, if he can continue that pace, I mean, he's unbeatable.
It's true. If you can just keep that pace up, that's all you need in the world. I will go, you know what? I'll go Nick Chubb. I'm playing the most of him. I believe in his talent. I believe he's a very good player in a great spot. And yeah, I'm going to ride or die with Nick Chubb this week. So if Nick Chubb blows up, you can tweet me and know that I am very sad. So that is a confirmed fact. I will have a shameful amount of Nick Chubb this week. And that's enough for us.
You won't be that sad because it's your birthday weekend.
That's true. I won't be extra sad at all when my birthday weekend blows up in my face thanks to Nick Chubb and his beautiful salary. And Damian Ratley, both those guys just laughing at me for banking out the Browns. Ugh, I could see it happening already. That and the Brock Osweiler thing. Those two things are definitely going to occur. All right, that's it for us this week, guys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, throw us a like, become a member of Osmo.com Premium by using promo code Contrary. All the ownership projections that we talk about, Alex's rankings, some other projections from our guys, Andrew, who is doing a great job every week. You see him on the A to B shows. He also does really fantastic NFL projections. You just plug right into Fantasy Cruncher. So go ahead, sign up now. Promo code Contrary will get you all that information that you need. Fantasy Cruncher is separate for us, so keep that in mind as well. But that's all free. So, hey, go join us there. Any parting words, folks? Or I guess not folks, just Alex.
Well, did I mention Kerryon Johnson? But anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks, Chris. It's always a pleasure talking. And Nolan, although he didn't last till the end of the stream, we might need to work on his endurance a little bit. It was great having him, and I especially liked how he brought the matchup information. That made me feel like I was almost talking to Evan Silva, even though he's only here in spirit this week. And then Josh, of course, producing the show every week. Thank you.
And go check out Nolan's column from the slot. It'll be coming up shortly on Osmo.com. Nolan does a good job with that column every week. He's a very smart guy. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And thank you guys for the birthday wishes in the chat. I appreciate you. Ride my birthday luck. It's a great success this week, and we'll all get rich together, I'm sure. But thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate you, and we'll see you again next week. Have a good one.